Hello, everybody. Good evening, and you're very welcome to our webinar this evening, which is Teaching Techniques for the Junior Cycle Business Studies exam. My name is Conor Walker. I work with the publishing team for Post-Primary in Fowlands, and I'm joined this evening by Chloe Keane, who will be presenting very soon, and she'll be taking the lion's share of all the webinar, so I won't be hanging around for too much longer. But bit of housekeeping just to begin with. We're recording this and it's a live webinar though. So if you have any questions as we go, just fire any questions that you might have into the chat, and there'll be a Q&A session at the end of the webinar after Chloe's done her presentation where we can answer as many questions as we can. We'll probably run until around 7:50, if that's okay, 7:45, 7:50. We know everybody's very busy this evening, so we don't want to keep you too long. But that's kind of what the running order is going to look like. So Chloe, if you maybe just click forward onto the next slide. I just wanted to mention to everyone joining us this evening that this webinar, I suppose, is in conjunction with us recently publishing the second edition of Smart Business. So it's that came out last year, and it's a complete teaching package for junior cycle business. So on the print side, we've got the textbook, we've got a skills and accounts book for students to practice their skills and accounting skills. We've also got then a teacher's guide, which includes a full range of planning resources for teachers who are planning their way through the 3 years. Then on the digital side, we've got a comprehensive set of resources such as the ebook. We've got a whole range of PowerPoints, bookkeeping videos, termly exams, and web links that you can use and incorporate into your classroom teaching. So on the next slide, I'm just going to go through just, I suppose, the key elements of the Smart Business approach in the second edition particularly. So there's 4 cornerstones essentially to the teaching package. So from a teaching, learning and revision point of view, we've got a really smartly structured book where every chapter is structured by learning goal or learning intention. So you state your learning goals at the beginning, and then the chapter itself is broken up in sync with those learning goals that you have. There's lots of practice in the chapter, and then you also have revision and summary material that again is aligned with the learning goals that are set out at the beginning of the chapter. The strong exam focus in the book, obviously, with us having several exam papers under our belt. So we have a dedicated exam chapter where we model different types of questions that students are likely to encounter in the paper. And we use and present strategies that they can use to answer those questions along with model answers. And then all the way through the book, the questions that we pose are largely informed by the type of questions that you're likely to see in the examination itself. We've also got CBA support elements within the teaching package. So in the textbook itself, we've got sections that explain the different CBAs and what's required for those. So that offers a support to both teachers and students. And also in the skills and account books, there's sections where students can log ideas for both CBA 1 and CBA 2 all the way through first, second and third year. And then finally, planning is a very important part of the teaching package where we supply schemes of work and a full range of lesson plans, which are also editable if you want to customize them for your own classroom needs. So next then, I think just before I hand you over to Chloe, I'm going to mention that if you would like to take a look at any of the resources for the new Smart Business teaching package, you can find them on fowlands.ie. I think we're going to just share a link with you to that. So if you click that, that'll take you to the website where you can access the textbook, the skills and accounts book, elements of the teacher's guide and various other digital resources. So it gives you a flavour of what the whole programme is like. You can learn more about it there. The link I see has just gone in. Karan's just posted it. So thanks very much for that, Karan. So that's enough, I think, from me. I'm going to now hand you over to Chloe. Chloe Keane is a business studies teacher at Castletroy College in Limerick. She teaches business studies, business and accounting, and she's recently qualified as well to teach maths. So she'll be teaching maths anytime soon, I'm sure, as well. And Chloe is also the chair of the Limerick branch of the BSTAI. She also worked with us on lots of different elements of smart business as a reviewer, and also wrote lots of content and provided lots of really useful input to us during the creation of the teaching package. So with that, Chloe, I'm going to disappear for the next 30 minutes or so, and I'll hand it over to you. So best of luck.
Perfect, thanks a million. Just making sure you can hear me okay, but I assume it's all good. So I suppose what I'm going to be taking you through tonight is just kind of looking at exam technique, kind of focusing on third year class, and I suppose leading from second year into third year. So we're going to give a quick look back over the 2023 paper and just how you can use it with your students, or what you can take from it, I suppose, to prepare you for the next. How I would interpret the command verbs, having looked at marking schemes and spoken to other examiners, common mistakes and errors that are made with the breakdown of the marks and how they can lose out marks in different areas, and then just the approach to exam style answers, which kind of ties in with the revision techniques that I use at the moment. I have 2 third year classes, and for the last few years I've always had 2 third years, so it's, I suppose, sharing ways that I do it that kind of reduces the workload a small bit for teachers. Okay, so just going in, I've just taken kind of random questions from the 23 paper and looked at it from different points of view. So feeding on from previous sample papers that have been there, now that we have got a few years to look back on, the theme all the time is that students need to be really specific. And I suppose firstly specific to the key term in the question, and then also specific to the reference or the example that's been made in the question. So in this case here, the key term that they need to be aware of is the rights of the consumers, but not only the rights of the consumers, because they seem to know that, have a good grasp of that, but if they can at all refer to the fact that they're shopping online. That's kind of something that's feedback. There was another thing, and it'll be another questions down long about local and the fact that they need to refer back to something local. So if they are doing this question, like a good example there is the 14-day cooling off period, which is only relevant to online. Again, of course, they can use any example once they're referring to the rights of consumers, but if they can at all, I always say to them, look back, use that bug technique, you know, box around the command word, underline the keyword, and glance back at the question. And that's where I say to my students, when you're glancing back at the question, is there an example in the question you can link to, or is there something specific in the question that you can link to? This is another one where it's more specific. So it's outline, and I'll come back to that command word outline. So outline 2 reasons, and sometimes they're specific in the amount of reasons. Most of the time in the new junior cert papers now, they're specifically telling students 2 or 3 or however many reasons. So outline 2 reasons why cultural enterprise is important in society. And I suppose what I've gotten back from, we finished our mocks and gotten the feedback back, what a lot of mine are doing is they're answering the question correctly, but they're not referring back enough. So that's something that I'm trying to focus on now with third years. So they've given the little blurb and a case study, a small bit about the Galway Arts Festivals. That's the example of cultural enterprise. So I say to them all the time, use state, explain, example as best as possible. Even though it's outline, and I'd use that with explain as well, and I'll come back to that again, but the cultural enterprise is the specific keyword there that they need to be zoning in on, and the impact on society. So like in the marking scheme, they've referred to community pride, local area, creates employment in the local area, brings entertainment to the local area. So it's all about referring back to local. That was a big thing that was spoken about, and I've spoken to other examiners about this, that there might have been partial marks given, or they've lost marks for not referring specifically to local, and they mightn't be as lenient moving forward. So that came out of last year's exam, and you can see it again in the previous year's exam as well. Okay, this is an example of how they can refer specifically to the example given in the question. Like I'm always saying when it's explained, so in this one it's explain the term entrepreneur, and I always say to them, state, explain, example is the best method for all the questions. So the example there is literally given to you. They've spoken about Ed O'Donnell as the entrepreneur. So when you're explaining the term, you're given the definition, and the example can refer back to the question. They don't always have to remember their own example. Most of the time there's a little case study or a blurb given there, and they can refer back to that as the example. So referring to the accounting topics now, So double entry, from what we've seen the last few years, has been final accounts, and double entry has kind of come up as short questions in the paper. So balancing the final account. Now, mine are very good at doing the full analysed cash book and the double entry, the general ledger, the trial balance, but they kind of got caught, and this came up in the version of the mock that we would have done. So they got caught when they saw it in a smaller, condensed down version of the account. So all they had to do here was balance it. There's other examples where they might have to perform the physical double entry. And the breakdown of the marks in this case was 1 mark for the date, and the format of the date isn't very specific. You could say May 31st, or you could say the 31st to the 5th. They're not strict on that once it's making the date clear. And you don't have to rewrite May again here, because May is given at the top of the question. So I've had questions asked like that from students before, and that's okay. The 1 mark for the date, and there's 1 mark for the figure given there, and then transferring the figure down from the balance carried down to the balance brought down. And if they have miscalculated it, or they've incorrectly found the balances there, then their own figure is fine, and they'll still get the marks for that, and then using the total figures. So what I've kind of done now, following on from the mocks, is I've just made a few examples, either read them on Word or drawn them out myself, and got them to either perform the double entry, given them a sentence, asked them to perform the double entry, or just got them balancing the condensed down versions of these accounts in that layout. Because I just found, while they were able to do it in the full topic, when it came to a smaller, I suppose that's the hard part of 3rd year for the students, is linking back to previous things they've done in a smaller version, or when it's linked with another chapter. So I took that and I just made a couple of worksheets from previous exam papers out of that. Very simple to do, but it is something that was catching them, and they were falling down on the same things all the time. Okay, and then on to the other final accounts, the other accounting topic that has come up in the exams. So final accounts has come up so far last year and this year as a full question. They had a small bit of the template given to them for the income statement. But this is something that students can just forget. While they calculate depreciation and they put it in the income statement, some of the examples, it's not always given in a box format like the paper. So I suppose drawing their attention to that from the start, when you start the topic, that the extra information, usually the closing stock and depreciation, is given down the bottom of the question in a smaller box underneath the trial balance. And I kind of go through a method when I'm doing final accounts about how to read the question first and take the information from it. So I always say, okay, read the trial balance, label it, label where it's going in the 2 different accounts, and then always read the top and the bottom of the question, and then go about starting your question. So this is just something I think it's important to draw their attention to, especially just to make sure that they're not looking for it in a panic when they come to it, that they've already got it labelled and they know where it's going. And the marks then are broken down, so there's 2 marks each for those figures, and it's better to put those 2 depreciations in separately. That's a question they can ask, can I just put 1 depreciation expense in? What if I don't have enough lines? So they put the 2 depreciations in separately once they have the space for it. Okay, the next thing with the final accounts is, I suppose, the headings are important now, and that's why I kind of spend time with the template at the start. I usually do the 2 accounts separately. So I do the income statement first, and I usually break it down into the trading account and the profit and loss and appropriation. And I do it section by section, and the books are laid out that way. Smart Business has a couple of examples where it's laid out separately and then an overall question. And that's the way I would approach it. Usually when they do the topic, then if I'm, let's say, for instance, doing trading account and we've practiced a couple of trading accounts, I usually do a small test on the template, and then I'll do a test on the whole income statement template and the whole statement of financial position template. So it doesn't have to be something very tricky. I usually just get them to mark themselves out of how many headings there should be in it. I give them a trial balance and get them to write out the headings they think they are, or else I'll just say, okay, this is the income statement. I've given you sales, less cost to sales, you fill in the rest of the headings. Or if it was a weaker class, I might give them a template, Tipp-Ex out some of the headings and get them to fill in the blanks of the headings, and then they just give themselves a mark on that. And I kind of know then what students are struggling to learn the template, if that's what's going wrong with them doing the questions. And 90% of the time with final accounts, it's the template that they struggle with. So I try and spend time at the start for that. And just speaking about the template then, I suppose headings are important here. The current liabilities / creditors falling due within 1 year. It was spoken about last year when the marking scheme was released. So the new accounting standards, the ISA, has changed, that they wanted it. I suppose if you do leaving cert accounting, you'd be aware of it, that it's creditors falling due within 1 year is the correct title. Now, they are still accepting current liabilities, but they've said moving forward, they don't see themselves giving that leniency. Finance buying this year, working capital and total net assets, all got a heading for just the title of itself. But they're also saying you need to make the authorised and issued titles to be in there. Who's saying that next year or the year after, if final accounts come up again, that they wouldn't award the headings authorised and issued the mark there, because they're choosing different headings to give the marks to. So I've just made it aware there that the marks are awarded for headings and slightly more specific than last year. And this just rounding up what I've said there, that it should be current liabilities falling due within 1 year. Like the kids kind of say, oh, I don't have enough space for that. They don't have to fit it in the first box. It can go all the way across like it is here, and to just separate out the authorised and issued share capital. And I suppose that's why I make a big thing about reading the top of the question, labelling it, and reading the bottom, because the authorised share capital is usually given at the top of the trial balance as well. Same thing here with net profit. The actual figure got the marks, but so did the heading net profit. And then I suppose just to be aware that they are allowing for opening reserves or profit and loss balance on the 1st, and the same thing with, it's either closing reserves, they allow retained profit, retained earnings, or the profit and loss balance on 31st as well. So there's more leniency there with those two, but I suppose I would just make sure the current liabilities falling due within 1 year is something I'm drawing their attention to. Now, I still make them label it as current liabilities. They don't have to write the whole thing out, but for the heading, definitely. Then I suppose that brings me on to taking the exam questions and looking at the specific command verbs. So I suppose looking at the way the questions have come up previously, explain is there, and it's usually to do with a key term or a definition, like the example there, explain the term entrepreneur. There, I say to the kids, when it's explain, it's looking for 2 pieces of information. So state, explain, example is the best way to go. The state is just giving back what they've said. So I always make them say for the state, the key term. So entrepreneur is the key term. Give them back what they've asked you in the question. You explain it by giving the definition, and then the example, if there's an example to refer to in the question, or if you can think of an example from a real life business scenario. Distinguish is just telling the difference between them. So I usually try and get kids to give 2 definitions, or if it's, for example, between work and employment, or volunteerism and work, or volunteerism and employment, that they're picking something like payment to tell the difference between them, but 2 definitions with an example if they can. Describe, I suppose describe comes up with describing a key term. So again, it's state, explain, example, or describing the advantage and disadvantage. So I always say to them, refer to the question and give an example if you can. And I look at examples where there's explain or describe the benefit or describe the advantages, because I tell them to do something slightly different there. And the same with outline. So outline the impacts, outline the effects. I say to them, state, explain, expand. So can you explain the impact itself? So if it's a benefit, if it's an impact, if it's an advantage, I say state, explain the impact or the advantage, or whatever the case is. Identify, they just want a brief, but I say to them, with identify, with state, try and still give a full sentence and use state, explain if you can. Don't just leave it as a one-worded answer. I know the mocks are slightly different, but I suppose that's where mine were falling down. They were asked for state, but their answers were just too brief. The marking scheme still expected them to give the key term and at least an example. It's been seen in previous exam papers that say, for example, what state the reasons for saving. It wasn't enough just to say future needs. They expected them to give an example as well. Classify is just put into categories or examples. So there was a similar enough question in this paper about different types of expenditure previous year, and then this year it was about different types of income, so regular income or regular income. Illustrate, just I always say to them, it means give an example. Okay, they're asking you to show something, so you're going to show them an example, or it could come up something out of the graph or something out of a diagram, so you're expected to refer back to it. It might be supply and demand graph. So state, explain, example is the safe bet, basically, is what I say to my kids for no matter what the command verb is. You can't go wrong if you state, explain, example. And kind of what came out of marking papers in the last few years, they're saying that they're giving the boxes. You can only write in the boxes. You can't write outside them. But then some of the kids say to me, oh, well, there's three lines, and they're asking for 2 reasons. There's 3 lines each. And I say to them, they want you to fill the box as much as possible. That's something that has been fed back from marking, that they do want kids as much as possible to fill the box with information. So state, explain, example, again, just keep reiterating that. And I suppose with the outline, which we'll look at now in a minute, it's state, explain the impact or expand on it. Okay, so then just the breakdown of the marks there. So it's kind of all or nothing for certain things, like the order of something. So for example, if it was the order of business documents, you're going to get all or nothing if they're wrong. You're not going to get partial marks because one of them is in the right place. Explain is going to get 3 full marks or 0. I know some of the mocks are, maybe if it's a 6 marker question, it can be 6, 5, 3, 1. But most of the time in the actual exam papers, it seems to be 3 marks or nothing. So they've got to give a full description. Partial isn't really getting them anything, especially if they're not including a key term. They might get 1 mark there if their explain at least has the relevant key term. The multiple choice questions sometimes then, depending on what way they come up, can be depending on what the marks awarded, but most questions in the whole paper are totaling 6. So each section, even if it's in a long question, most of the time the sections are broken down by 6 or possibly 9 sometimes. So for multiple choice questions, if it was true, false, false, it usually is the first question is heavily weighted and then the other 2 are smaller marks. So it kind of reflects leaving cert business there where it's 4, 1, 1. So if it was 3 true or false, it'd be 4 for the first correct answer and then 1, 1 after that. And that's where I'm just speaking about again, with that all or nothing approach, you're better to encourage kids as much as they can to use the total amount of space that's been given to them on the paper. Okay, so some of the common errors or where they've lost out on marks. For calculations, it's small things like they're hearing about this in other subjects as well, like maths. So forgetting the euro sign if it is a calculation question, like maybe saving and borrowing, 1 mark lost for that, or not showing any workings. So most of the time with a calculation question, there's specifically a workings box and they're expected to use it. So I'm kind of harsh with mine when I test them. I don't do it in first year, but from 2nd and 3rd year on, I always dock the marks if they don't show me the workings for any of the calculation topics. I do try and get them to write the formula. As of now, there's no marks been awarded for formulas, but just to kind of drill it into their heads, anytime they do a calculation, I make them write out the formulas every time. So if it's saving or maybe the ratios for final accounts. For graphs, I suppose it can be graphs or infographics here. So a lot of the papers have started using maybe pie charts, bar charts, but they're also linking infographics, maybe the CSO. So maybe at the end of 3rd year, if you've time and you're finished all the topics, like I do the economics topics usually after Christmas and 3rd year after the mocks are done, because that's when the most relevant things are going on and we can speak about any changes that happened before Christmas. And that's when I might just take a class at the end of the chapter and go onto the CSO, put up some infographics on the board and see if they can interpret them, and then go through like what questions could you be asked around this and give them possible questions on the infographics. Misreading the graph or the question itself. So this was something that came up at a previous exam paper, a drop in unemployment. So when I was doing the economics indicator chapter, they talk about the impact of high employment, the impact of low employment, and just making kids aware that a drop in unemployment is basically the same thing as saying to them that there's higher employment, more people are working. And then the lead on from that question was to speak about the impact on that on the consumer or society or the business or the government or whatever it was. So if they misinterpreted reading that from the graph, they then misinterpreted, even though they get perfect information in the rest of their question, they misinterpreted the graph. So they're losing out on the marks for that. Supply and demand seems to be a continuing topic that's coming up. It's come up in question 18, which seems to be at the moment a mix of economics questions. I don't know if that'll always be the way, but it seems to be coming up as a question, and it's usually that they're given a graph that they have to draw or they have to label majority of the time, and most of the time it is labeling of the supply and demand curves itself and showing where the equilibrium is. But I have said to them, like, you could get a case where they just give you the raw graph and nothing is labeled, so they need to be aware on what the label are for the axis, and like they're used to that from science and other subjects that cross over where they'd be using a lot of graphs. So supply and demand is something that I usually do in second year briefly, and then I come back to kind of talk about the factors of supply and demand again in third year. So just going through some exam style answers, and I suppose shown in practice where I speak about the state, explain, expand. So this is an example where it asked outline one economic and one social benefit. So they had to be specific in the benefit that they were speaking about. It didn't just say two benefits of Ireland's membership of the EU. So the economic benefit that they gave in the marking scheme, and there was a couple of different ways they could frame this, was access to the single market. But like that's not enough for an outline question. So they should be using state, explain, examples. So for example, access to the single market, explain this means that there'd be free movement of goods or provides the free movement of goods, services, capital. And what they need to be doing to explain the impact or the benefit is I try and give them like connector sentences, I call them. So if I was asking them to do this in class, I would give them an example first and then try and get them to do another benefit using the same frame. So access to the single market, this provides free movement of goods. As a result, this makes Ireland more attractive to foreign direct investment. So I would use as a result or which will lead to. They're the kind of two connector sentences that I've given my third years. And I've said, if you see an outline question, these are the two sentences you need to think of, and you need to give a small bit more information. So you should be looking for two pieces of information there. This is just an example of differentiate. So this is where I was talking about you can either give two definitions or two things that they do differently. So employment involves getting paid, whereas volunteers do not receive payment. Then they spoke about the marking scheme. This refers to differences in regard to time, contract, motivation. So clearly state them, put them on two separate lines. I say to them, you've loads of space in the exam paper. There's usually 6 lines if it's 2 parts to the question, or at least 4 lines. You've got loads of space to divide up your answer and make it clear, but just don't write outside the box. I suppose because they're scanning the papers, they need to be aware of that. And a lot of the time at third year or second year, they tend to have this huge handwriting that naturally goes outside. So what I do when I give them a test is I try and frame the test like it looks like an exam paper. I make sure I give them the boxes that are similar sized, just make them on Word or Google Docs or whatever. And I try and give them the same space that they'd have it in an exam question. And then I always give them a section at the end that says extra writing space and try and teach them on how to use extra writing space to label the column with the question and the section that they're coming from, and then to continue on their answer and that, so they don't lose out on marks. So explain, this is and explain that similar, I suppose, to outline, that they state, explain the advantage if they can. So you'll see here the connectors that the marking scheme is used is just which, or which leads to, or which will. So explain the advantages to a business of recycling. Like they have a lot of common knowledge with this. So it's just about building on their answers. So for example, it can help create a positive work culture, which leads to. They could reuse their recycled product, which will reduce. So it's that which will, or this leads to, or can lead to, those connector sentences when it comes to advantages, benefits, impact, disadvantages, whatever it is. Okay, so recommend, I suppose this is something that's coming up. It wouldn't have been in the first year's papers, but more in the last 2 years now. So this was an example under the national budget. So it said, in the event of a surplus in the national budget, advise the Minister for Finance on what to do with the surplus money. So they're asked to give some sort of a recommendation or advice here. Now, I tried to say, and they're mad for this, I don't know why it is, but anytime it comes to the Minister for Finance and the national budget, I don't know about your students, but mine are mad to say reduce taxes. They would just love if the taxes could be reduced. So I tried to say to them, stay away from that. What else could they do to help the country? They're not going to just scrap the taxes that they have. So the generic answers that they can use is repay the national debt. They could use it for the cost of servicing of national debt, increase spending on public services. And then I say to them, essential services like healthcare and education are good ones to always use as examples. So I suppose this would be a good sample answer to use if you were doing the national budget and what could be done with a surplus. This is another sort of recommendation question, and usually when it's the source of finance topic, it is to do with a recommendation. It's identifying the appropriate source of finance. So if you're doing the source of finance, depending on the book you're using, like it comes up with business type of businesses, or you can link it in with the financial life cycle briefly in first year. If you're recapping it again in second year, I usually do this topic in second year, and then we look at it again in final accounts. So recommend a suitable source of finance that Copon Eco Limited could use to fund an expansion. So when I do questions like this with the students, I get them to underline the fact that it's a suitable source of finance and what the finance is for. So this is for an expansion and it's a large extension to their premises. So I say to them, okay, straight away, is that short, medium or long? Now, this is saying the suitable source of finance is a long-term loan. I would always get them to say, if they're asked for a reason, something to do with the duration of it. Like if it's a large premises, it's long-term. If it's a car, it's medium-term. So when you're picking your source of finance, try and refer to the length of time or the amount of time they'd have to pay it back. So one of the sample answers here was a long-term loan, and they had to explain it. So again, you're using state, explain. So it's a long-term loan which must have collateral as security and is over 5 years. So over 5 years brings in that long-term element into that. The same here with the grant, this source of finance that does not have to be repaid. This came up recently when I was looking at the marking scheme. And another thing that they have to, just to bring to your attention, when it comes to the grant, they expect students to say that it doesn't have to be repaid, but also they need to say something about the conditions or that it's been used for the purpose intended. So that was something that came up in a different question to explain the term grant, and they lost marks if they didn't say about the conditions that it comes with or the purpose that they're supposed to use it for. Okay, so that just brings on to some revision tips. So things that students can use and that I use with my third years. I usually start in third year in September, giving them some independent revision to try and encourage them to start revising and learn how they best revise. So I usually focus on key terms because that's the framing of all their answers. So, and I'll show you an example of how they know what key terms come up in each topic. So to learn the key terms, I usually start in September of third year. We do our CBA fairly soon in September, so we're not really going on with a topic in class. So while that's going on, I set them one topic or two topics if they link. So let's say, for example, entrepreneurs and types of enterprise, I can link together. I link usually 2 or 3 of the consumer chapters together at one time. And I set it for them to do for a week. So I usually make maybe Monday or the Friday my revision day. And I set them a revision topic on the Monday, and then we look at it again on the following Monday, and I give them some homework to do. So in September, I usually start off easily enough, and I give them maybe a Quizlet or a definition dot or a summary of a chapter with the success criteria. So what I want them to know by the end of revising that chapter. And I ask them to put up proof of revision. I use Google Classroom. So I ask them to take maybe a picture of a mind map, or if it's Quizlet, the score that they got in the quiz. And they can do that in study clicks. There's multiple choice quizzes now. They can take the chapters from the end of the question, which I'll show you, and just take a picture of them. And then you go through them, correct them quickly in the first 10 or 15 minutes of that following week's class. The definition dots is just something where I've given them a sheet out. It might be maybe 3 or 4 chapters on it, and I list all the definitions, and then I will just get them to pick the definitions that I want them to do that week. And there's usually a dot beside it where they can say they've revised it the first time, a second dot to tick if they can say it without looking back at it. So that's all the definition dots mean. It's just something like how many times there could be 3 dots beside it. Have they looked over it 3 times? Have they written it out? Can they say it back to themselves without checking back on their notes? Now that we finished our mocks, and after Easter, I usually do this. I'll take an accounting topic a week, and rather than doing a theory topic, I'll get an accounting topic a week, and I'll get them to revise that. So I'll do a final account. I'll give them a final account on a Monday to correct for the following Monday, or maybe that Friday. The following week, then I'll do an analysed cash book, then a budget, then a cash flow. And if we've enough weeks left, we'll go back to the start again, and just giving them one a week to keep it fresh in their minds. Because I just find, especially with final accounts, if they stop using it and they stop writing out the template, they forget it. And when it comes back to it, they're kind of going, oh, how did I do that? Or how did I do this? So to keep it fresh in their minds. It could even be the case that you just give them all the short questions or the extracts out of a couple of exam papers, and you get them to practice that. Review with the formulas and calculations. So usually at the front of exam papers or in the front of books or at the end of a chapter, to do with the calculations, there's the formulas are there. So sometimes if it's calculation chapter, I will just make sure that on the success criteria, which I'll show you an example of in a second, that the formulas are a section on that and that they're learning any formulas. So it could be the ratios of final accounts, or I suppose saving and borrowing. They're kind of the main ones that come up. Links to chapters and refresher questions in a test. So this is something that I might start in second year if I'm getting them ready for their summer tests, because we usually test them in second year on some of their first year chapters, and in third year before Christmas. And we usually give a Christmas test. It's called Christmas, but it's an October assessment before they get into the revision for the mocks. I'll just give them maybe 1 or 2 questions at the start of a test on a previous topic that they've revised, especially in third year. If you're giving them a class test and a topic you're doing, why not throw in 2 definitions at the start from another chapter that you were revising that week or the week before to see if they've been learning it. The exam paper question practice or exam style question practice, like there's a couple of examples in the book that I will refer to in a second, but as much exam papers as they can. So if you've done something in a class, and you're not finished a chapter, but you've looked at, I suppose, I was looking at government economic policy today. So we're talking about the introduction of new taxes and the implications that have, the impact that has in the government and businesses. So always at the end of a class, I try and end the class, especially all throughout third year, doing some sort of an exam question. So I'll tell them how I want the question to be framed, and then I'll ask them to do it. I'll go quickly around the room and look at the ones that they have. Then I'll show them a sample answer, and I'll say to them, okay, do you have anything close to this? Do you want to check anything with me that you said that you're not sure if you get the marks for? And then I tell them where the marks will go. So that's just something that I do throughout third year. This is an example of the success criteria that I have been speaking about. So I started doing this from first year, where I just take it, and it doesn't have to be that you rewrite it out. So I started from first year. When it comes up to a test, I usually say to them, okay, this is the test you're going to get next week or Friday or whatever, and this is what you need to know for the topic. So I've just taken income there, and we usually do at my school, we mix the pay slips in with them, a basic pay slip. So these are the main keywords. Can you explain each of them? Can you give an example? In the pay slip, can you calculate each of the following? For sources of income, can you explain these scenarios? What would be done at the different stages of the financial life cycle, or what income would they have at this level? So I give this out to them, and if I have time, I do a revision class with them where we fill this in class, or else I get them to do this for homework. And then the class before the test, I'll either put the solution up on the board and they can check it, or we'll go through it. So then I just show them, or put it up in Google Classroom if I don't have time. I don't write out full sentences for them. I usually just take the main key words from that definition that they should know. So in income, something about money received, coming into households. This would have been for a first year class for a test that they were having. Regular income, did they have the word fixed or set or the same amount on a regular basis? So just did they have the specific words in their definition that they should have? And then if it's a formula, making sure that they have the correct formula that they need to calculate. Now, you don't have to go through the extent of doing all of this and making it up. You could just take the summaries from the end of the chapter in the Smart Business book and say, okay, these are the main keywords. Can you explain each of these keywords? And then the summary is done for you. And that could be your success criteria for your test. You could just call it a summary of the chapter. Or you could take the sample questions at the end and say to them, okay, if you can answer question 12, 13, and 14, you would be set up for this test. Or can you answer the exam question? Just giving them an expectation of what you expect them to know for the test, and you don't have to make extra work out of it for yourself. The exam question practice, I suppose when I do the revision of each chapter as it goes on through third year, I started easily enough in September with the Quizlets or a mind map for the easier kind of first year chapters. Then when it gets on to second year chapters and there's more content in it and I want them to start practicing exam questions, I usually set them exam paper questions to do. But if you're doing that, you run out of questions then by the time it comes to this side of third year. Like I might do a certain topic and I've run out of the topics of those exam questions. Because if you actually go through the sample papers that we have, there might only be 6 short questions and a bit of a long question to do with entrepreneurs or to do with income and expenditure. So this section in the Smart Business book is at the end of the book, and it refers to the chapters that it links to, and it just has modelled exam paper questions that I would start doing now at this stage in third year at mine. If I was going back over a topic as best as I can, I might take a day in the week if I can, to start doing a topic with them, or if I can fit 2 topics in on that revision day, I'll start revising the topic with them. And how I revise it is we'll quickly go through the success criteria. They have a lot of them now. I'll show it up on the screen from Google Classroom or the summary chapter. And then I'll start practicing the exam paper questions. So there's a lot of extra questions in here that are useful to help them to practice when you run out of exam papers. And I suppose that's it then from my side of things.
That's great. Thanks so much, Chloe. So you covered a lot of ground there, and I'm sure that, well, I hope that people found that useful, particularly kind of doing such an in-depth review of the exam and how it's marked, and various tips, strategies, techniques you might encourage students to use to help ensure they do the best and can be as successful as they can be in the exam in third year. So Chloe, you'll have noticed she included some screenshots there of pages from the Smart Business book. We've already included, or given a mention to the website. So if you want to go on and take a look at the Smart Business resources and the books that we have there, feel free to do that. But if you want to get in touch with your rep, you may already know your local rep, but they're certainly available for calls and appointments to meet up and discuss the program or the teaching package in more detail if you want to do that. And they can obviously arrange samples or inspection copies for you if you need to contact them. Karan's just thrown the link in there to chat, so you can use that link. If you enter your school name or your roll number, that will then return the contact details for your local rep. And obviously with the new book scheme coming out, the new government funded scheme coming out for junior cycle. So the circular, I think, has been released for that, or it's soon to be released, if not today, tomorrow. We have solutions for that in place. And if you need to discuss that with your local rep, they can certainly advise and help you on that front. So again, it's all available on folens.ie. So that's that pitch out of the way. We'll go to the Q&A. So great. Chloe, there's a few questions that have come in here, so I'm going to try to get through as many as I can. I know we're a little bit up against it now, so maybe working my way backwards. Thomas asked, I think we've spoke about this this week, Chloe, but Thomas asks, hi Chloe, would you accept closing balance instead of balance carried down and opening balance instead of balance brought down? Presumably that's just in relation to terminology that you might use in your T account, is it, the balancing?
No, I wouldn't. When I've looked at the marking schemes that have been given, the guidelines of it, they definitely have to have the word balance. And they said that they're going to be more strict on the marks that they give for it. And I just think when they start, if they were to go on to leave insert accounting and they're using closing balance instead of balance carried down, they'll be a bit lost. I would prefer to use balance carried down, balance brought down. Just from an accounting point of view, that's the correct way to do it. And I think moving forward, they'll definitely only accept definitely the word balance anyway, but I would be putting in the CD and BD as well. Okay.
Thanks for that. I hope that answers your question, Thomas. Next up, is it a guarantee to have the final accounts as a full long question? Because I guess that has come up so far, hasn't it? At the end, there's a full accounts question. I mean, you maybe, I don't know whether you can predict the future, but what do you think? Is there a guarantee of that? Is that a pattern, or would you hasten to even?
I don't think in the initial papers there was the analysed cash book was there, and I kind of said, oh, will that be the guaranteed question? Are they only going to put final accounts as a short extract? I wouldn't guarantee it, no. That's why I've been trying to do an accounting topic a week with them. I don't know if it's 100% a guarantee, but I mean, if it's not a long question, it's definitely going to be there as an extract, and vice versa with the analysed cash book. If it's not a long question, double entry or an extract of an analysed cash book is going to be there. So if they knew it in full, they'd be the best prepared.
Okay, thanks. Next, what topics do you feel are best to leave to third year?
I always do the economics topics in third year kind of after Christmas. When we come back in September, we do our CBA with third years kind of 2 to 3 weeks in September. So what I usually do at the start is I'll do the impact of digital technologies and the impact an impact of an organization on a community. I try and do the impact chapters so that I can kind of drill home how to answer the outline questions. So I do the 2 of them in third year, and I definitely leave a lot of the economics chapters because they're that bit older for the language that's used in them.
I don't know whether this is now the same as the question that was asked previously, but it just is it important to include the BD and CD in double entry? Does the date format matter?
No, the date format, once they can either say May 31st, for example, or they can say the 31st to the 5th. It doesn't matter. Once the month has been mentioned at least once in the account previously, they can just write down the 31st. If they were doing it from scratch themselves, once they use the same format the whole way down, it's fine.
Thank you. And when do you start using exam paper style questions with your classes?
I usually, in first year, I'm kind of lenient with the way that I'll give marks, but I always say to them, like, okay, when we start doing exam papers next, or we start looking at questions next year, you would lose marks there. So when I give them feedback on a test. From second year, I'll kind of the same. I start giving them exam paper style questions, a lot of the explain ones in their tests and things. And then a lot of the books have 1 maybe or 2, like Smart Business has 1 or 2 at the end of a chapter. So I'll start using those. And then I start in third year with exam papers, and I start marking everything like the exam papers would. So kind of all or nothing, the 0, 1, 3. So 0 for no keyword or no real explanation. I'd give them 1 mark in a test for using a keyword with no real explanation, and then 3 full marks for state explain example. So I try and mark them from second year on as if they'd be marked in the exam paper with a small bit of leniency depending on how the class are. But I definitely start in second year drip feeding them bits of exam questions.
Great. Thanks for that, Chloe. I'm just scrolling through the chat here. I don't see any more questions to go through, so apologies if I'm missing any. There's, I guess we're just coming close to 7:50. We might just wrap it up, but the webinar itself is being recorded, and I see that there's some requests that have come in for people asking for attendance certs and also just for a copy of the PowerPoint, so we can share that with you. I think Karan shared the info@folens.ie address. We should certainly circulate the recording of the PowerPoint with you, and everyone's registered who should get that, I think. But if you don't receive that or the PowerPoints, maybe you can just, again, contact us at info@folens.ie, and we'll be able to help and sort you out with whatever other resources you need. So I think that's it. Chloe, thanks so much for another great presentation. Really appreciate it. Appreciate your time. And to no worries. And to everyone else out there, to all the teachers who joined us this evening, thank you so much for joining us. This time of year in particular, if you're involved in Leaving Cert, there's so much going on, all happening at once. It probably feels completely manic. So to give us maybe 45, 50 minutes of your time this evening is really something that we appreciate. And I hope that you found it was time well spent, I think. I hope it was. So that's it, really. So from myself and from Chloe, thanks for joining us, and we hope to see you at the next webinar.